This year, Irvin Baxter and End Time Ministries is celebrating 20 years of radio broadcasting, a milestone that you, our faithful partners and listeners, made possible. On this edition of End of the Age, we will give you an inside look at how you have helped End Time Ministries reach millions of people over the last 20 years. Hi, welcome to End of the Age. I'm Dave Robbins, and joining me today in the studio is the man you've all come to love. He's the host of End of the Age, the founder and president of End Time Ministries, Irvin Baxter. Thank you for joining me today, Irvin.
Well, Dave, it's quite a milestone, 20 years, so it's good to just pause and look back and remember and thank God for what He's done. So that's what we're doing here today.
Absolutely. So this year marks really the huge milestone we've talked about, and I wanted to do this program all year. And since we're coming up to the last magazine and things like that, I wanted to put an article in there, and we've joined together to do a television program for everybody to give them an inside look. And what a huge milestone, 20 years of radio broadcasting. I mean, what a feat.
Well, you know, Dave, when I felt like God was dealing with me about going on radio, I thought, wait a minute, that means I'm going to be chained to a desk or to a microphone every day of the week at 3 o'clock every day, Central Time. And do I really want to do that? That means I lose my freedom, basically. And I told God at that day, I said, okay, God, if you want me to do it, I'm glad to do it. But if this is not your will, I don't want to just do this on a lark because it's going to be very confining. So for the last 20 years, every day at 3 o'clock, Monday through Friday, we've made our way to the microphone to produce these programs. And it has been incredibly rewarding because I was able to decide that it truly was God's will for us to do this.
Absolutely, and I believe that as well. I've seen so many miracles along the way that it's not even a question in my mind that it's been God's will from the very get-go. And so I want to ask you just a series of questions today to help me and some of our viewers give them an inside look at what's happened over the last 20 years that's really helped to shape this ministry, and many of them have been involved in that. So my first question would be, how did you get interested in prophecy? I mean, of all things, it's not the easiest topic to understand in the Bible. So how did you get interested in prophecy from the very beginning?
Well, you know, Dave, I was raised in church from the day I was born. Mm-hmm. I had wonderful parents, and they gave themselves to the work of God. And every once in a while, my dad would get this crazy idea to have one of these prophecy preachers come through. And I remember as an 8-year-old kid sitting on the front row, and they would preach about the mark of the beast, 666. That number alone scares you to death. Mm-hmm. They would preach about the Battle of Armageddon, blood flowing to the horse bridles. They'd preach about the 10-horn kingdom. And then I would leave the service. We lived next door to the church, so we'd go home, and Mother would tuck me in bed, and she'd say, go to sleep, Irvin Jr. and I'm laying there stiff as a board. Yeah, right. And so I'm laying there trying to go to sleep, but I can't. I'm thinking about all that I had heard that night. Right. And, you know, after a while, here comes a big dump truck by my window, and you know how it runs those shadows across your ceiling. And I would think, oh, there's that 10-horn beast right there in my bedroom. And finally, I'd go to sleep. And then I start dreaming I was in the Battle of Armageddon, and I would dream I'm swimming through blood flowing to the horse bridles, and I had blood in my ears and up my nose, and then I wake up, and it was a miserable night. I mean, I've always told Mom that was child abuse.
I heard that. So, wow, that's what really kind of got the juices flowing towards prophecy. You heard them guys teaching about it, and then you thought, man, I've got to delve off into this at some
Well,
point.
there was one more thing that really ignited me, and that was when I was in high school, Time Magazine came out with a special edition of Time Magazine, and the cover story in big bold letters, God is dead.
Right.
Well, I saw that, and that was a challenge because by then I was really strong in my faith, and I hated it that they'd come out with that. Well, then after that, I would start trying to witness to some of my classmates, and they'd say, I don't believe in God. I'd say, but the Bible says blah, 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 blah. They'd say, I don't believe in the Bible. Well, it flipped me on my back, because how do you witness to someone if they don't believe in God, they don't believe in the Bible? I thought, where in the world could I even start? Somewhere along the line, though, it dawned on me that if I could absolutely prove that the prophecies of the Bible given to us 2,000, 2,500 years ago were coming to pass in intricate detail, then that's absolute proof the Bible is supernatural and it's true.
Sure.
Once you prove the Bible is true, now you've got something to work with. You can begin then to explain the Bible. And of course, the Bible is God's instruction book for mankind.
Right.
So that was probably my biggest motivation. I really became interested in prophecy. I guess I have to say one more thing about that, Dave, and that is, I think God put it in me.
Right.
I didn't realize at the time why I had this really, really strong attraction to prophecy, but I think God already was preparing me then, what's it been, 50 years ago, for what ended up being my life's work. So when it's all said and done, I have to say, I think it was the call of God in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I've watched, I sit back and watch you a lot, and I've followed your teachings and things. And one of the things that I've had to realize is that in Daniel 12, the Bible says, close up and seal this book for the people of the time of the end. And then he draws you into this and starts revealing this stuff to you. And I've looked at that over the years and thought, man, what an unbelievable spot we're sitting in, and an opportunity to know the truth and understand these prophecies and to be able to spread them to the world. We're living a miracle. We're living in the end times. I know we teach that, but it's really set in on me after having taught all these Bible studies and things that we're living in the end time. There's no question about that.
Well, Daniel prayed because he had written the book of Daniel, one of the two most famous prophecy books in the Bible, and he gets to the last chapter and he thinks, what did I do? I don't understand the thing I wrote.
Right.
And so we find him in chapter 12 praying, saying, God, let me know what I wrote. I'd like to understand. And in verse number 9, as you mentioned, God said, no, Daniel, go thy way. The words are closed and sealed till the time of the end, not permanently. But all that you have written is designed specifically for the people at the time of the end. So now, in our lifetime, we have understood things that people have never understood before. And it's not because we're smarter, it's not because we're more spiritual, but it's because we are the people of the time of the end. Consequently, what a blessing to be able to understand the prophecies that nobody's been able to understand for the last 2,500 years. And all of a sudden, I'll never forget when I first saw the United States, Great Britain, Russia. I mean, I was a 22-year-old kid, but all of the commentaries taught it wrong. And I'll never forget the day I was in Starks, Louisiana. I think it was Starks, in a little old town. And I saw it. I'd been over praying at the church, studying. And I went over to my trailer where my wife was. I said, hey, Judy, I think I found the United States in the Bible today. And I opened it up to Daniel 7. I showed her, and she looked at that and said, boy, it sure sounds like it, doesn't it? And that was a milestone day in my life.
Man, no doubt.
Because you can't really understand the prophecies of the Bible. You can't really understand the book of Revelation. If you don't understand Daniel 7 and get that right, everything else is pretty well slammed shut to you. But once I understood that, then I understood Revelation 13, then I understood Revelation 17, and it was just click, 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 click. The pieces of the puzzle just kept falling together until the exhilarating, exciting things that all of us talk about every day on the air now, they all came to us.
Yeah, man, what a miracle we're living through. You started as a young minister. You began to understand the prophecies, and then you wrote your first book. I've got a copy of it here, A Message for the President. And in this book, you foretold the tearing down of the Berlin Wall, the symbol of the Cold War. Everybody said, Irvin, don't do that. Don't put that in writing. But yet you did, and because you saw it in the prophecies of the Bible. 3 years later, in 1989, the wall comes down. Everybody starts calling, Irvin, how in the world did you know that? Well, of course you knew it from the prophecies of the Bible. And that ultimately led to the birth of End Time Ministries. And this is really a question, because you're going to have to fill me in on some of this, because I wasn't around at that point. And I was just getting out of high school in '86. And then, of course, that led to the publication of End Time magazine in '91. And then eventually the radio broadcast in '98, which we're celebrating 20 years of that radio broadcast this year. So we could say that was the beginning of End Time Ministries in a nutshell. Is that correct?
Well, yes. I had been studying the prophecies now avidly for many years. They fascinated me. And once I saw the United States, Great Britain, Russia, Germany, and the countries of Europe in Daniel 7, and then I saw Revelation 13, where those same symbols are used, only they've now merged into one nation or one empire. I knew I had an understanding that the world needed, but I hated writing, and I hated history, and I hated speech. And so I would try to write it. People would say, you need to write, because I was speaking on it. Right. And people would say, you need to write this down. I know I need to. Like, I'd write a chapter, a part of a chapter, and I'd get stalled. Yeah. How do you make this stuff? How do you make these words go onto paper right so that it flows? And I got so aggravated with myself. And finally, God was dealing with him. I mean, God was pressing me so, he was bugging me day and night, really. Yeah. And finally I said, okay, I've got to get this book written. So I looked at my wife, Judy, and I said, babe, I've got to get this book done. She said, yes, you do. She's always really quick to tell me what I need to do. She's my number one inspiration. But anyway, she said, yes, you do. I said, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm not eating another bite of food until I finish this book. She looked at me, and then she said something I've always loved her for. She said, I'll fast with you. We'll do it together. Now, that was before we had computers. Yeah. So I'm sitting over at my desk, and I'm writing longhand. She's sitting across the office with a typewriter, and we're banging away, and we were working. And, well, finally, after 12 days, we put the last period on the last chapter. And, you know, we learned a wonderful principle during that time. The hungrier you get, the faster you will write. And so as soon as we put that last period, Judy jumps up from the typewriter. She says, let's go eat. So we did. Anyway, that's the way the first book was written. It was almost like we had to break through a spiritual block. And through the fasting and through the prayer. And God was so wonderful. Well, then we published the first book in '86, and nobody wanted to touch it because they didn't understand it. So I had to self-publish. But then I started advertising, and some people were kind enough to start buying it. So we probably had 4,000 or 5,000 copies in circulation by the time the Berlin Wall came down. Well, I put it in there. I'd known the Berlin Wall was coming down since 1968. That's when I really discovered it. Here I am in '86, almost 20 years later, just now getting around to put it in writing. So I published it, and people read it, and some people liked the book and so on and so forth, but it didn't really take off like a rocket. However, I'll never forget when Ronald Reagan stood at the Berlin Wall and said to Mr. Gorbachev, Mr. Gorbachev, if you love freedom like you say you do, tear down this wall. I mean, believe me, I was the person listening most intently on the face of the earth that day. I heard him say, I said, oh my goodness, here we go. Well, it wasn't but a year later until on November the 9th of 1989, the wall came down. And let me tell you, I was glued to the radio listening to all of the proceedings that day. When I heard about the wall coming down, well, then my phone started ringing because everybody that had one of my books started calling. I talked on the phone, I know 7 straight hours that day. Everybody say, you know, how did you know this? Where is this in the Bible? What does this mean? What's going to happen next? Well, that was a huge turning point. And that's what put the spurs in me to start End Time magazine. Because I knew that because I put it in my book, not only that the Berlin Wall was coming down, but that would be the signal of the start of the New World Order. And I use the term New World Order in the book. And
before George Bush came along and saying,
yeah, I published it in '86.
Yeah.
Well, in '89, when the wall came down, within 20 days, Herbert Walker Bush, Mikhail Gorbachev, and Pope John Paul II, they had their meeting together 20 days later. And they came out of the meeting announcing the birth of the New World Order. And I said, oh my goodness, I knew it was going to happen, but within 20 days, that was pretty stunning. So anyway, my phone was ringing, but I knew right then that it wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. Right. I knew I had to start a magazine that could keep God's people abreast of prophetic events, because I knew we had just moved into the end time.
Right.
And so I started trying to put together an end time magazine. That was another huge challenge.
Man, I know. I'm the editor of that magazine now, and that is a job. I can only imagine. And one of the things I got to say before we go on is that you wrote your first book, then we started publishing End Time Magazine, a bi-monthly magazine. So every other month, we were putting out a magazine, and I'm holding so we went on the radio in '98. This all led up to the radio at that point, but we went on the radio in '98. I'm holding a 1997 edition of End Time Magazine, and you wrote the entire magazine.
I wrote every one of them.
So that, yeah, I was going back through there looking at them, and I thought, man, you were writing the magazine every other month. So my next question is, what in the world inspired you to take on the daunting task of a daily radio program?
Well, once we started producing the magazine, I didn't know a sheet-fed press from a web press. Mm-hmm. And we had no typesetting in those days. You had to hire that done. Matter of fact, we owned an old line-to-type machine. You won't even know what that is. But if you owned one today, it might be worth some money. Anyway, but there was no typesetting machines in those days. Using your computer to set type, unheard of. Mm-hmm. I remember when they came out with the first, I think they called it the line-to-type machine, and it cost about $100,000. And one of the big printers in Richmond bought one, and I went and saw it, and I looked at it, I couldn't believe my eyes. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I was trying to learn how do you do all this stuff, and then I went out foolishly and bought a big camera that was about 40 feet long, and I learned how to do my own negatives. I'd go down in the basement, the lights were all off, I'd put myself under those red safe lights, and I would burn the negatives, and then I would develop the negatives, then I would lay it against the plates on the offset press and burn that, and sometimes I did it right, sometimes I did it wrong. I didn't know what I was doing, I was learning on the fly, and so this wasn't just simply writing a few articles and slapping it on some paper. I had to learn everything, you know. But guess what? When God calls you to do something,
right,
you got to do it. I mean, my parents drilled that in me. When God tells you to do something, you do it. And it doesn't matter what the cost is. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things that really has shoved me through everything we've done. Because I didn't know how to do any of this when we started.
Right.
But where there's a will, I guess there's a way, especially when God helps you. So anyway, well, that happened. We were publishing the magazine from 1991 until 1998. But I always knew that the magazine was not going to be enough to reach the entire world. Right. And I felt called to reach the entire world. So I thought, okay, if we can add to the magazine radio,
right.
Now we can advertise the magazine over radio and advertise radio over the magazine, and we can really enlarge our reach.
Right.
So God started really talking to me. I remember it was the year 1997. It's like God wouldn't leave me alone. He was pressing me day and night. Mm-hmm. And the last few months, as we went into 1998, it was almost like God was with me every day, talking to me. Well, I went down to Houston, Texas to speak for a friend of mine, Mike Anderson. Mm-hmm. And while I was down there, he said, hey, I've got a friend that owns a television station. He'd like to interview you about Bible prophecy. And would you be willing to go on? Well, we had produced a course called Understand the End Time back in 1994, and we had produced a flip chart with it. Yeah. So I said, okay. So I took my flip chart with me to the television station, and we set it up there on a little table, and I taught from my chart for 1 hour on the TV. Mm-hmm. Well, the man who owned the station, his name was Eldred Thomas, a wonderful person. He was, I think, 78 years of age at the time. But he was enthralled by what we were showing on these charts. After we finished, he looked at me and he said, would you come back tomorrow? So I went back the next day. And I did another lesson. And when we got done, he said, could you stop by my office before you leave? And I said, sure. So we went down to his office, and he said, I've been studying prophecy my entire life, and you've taught me things these last 2 days that I've never heard before. But he said, I know they're true. Well, my estimation for him went like this, because most people at the age of 78 years of age, they're not very open to new understandings.
Right.
They know by that time they've got their mind pretty well made up. But here this guy says, I've heard this for the first time and I know it's true. Well, I knew it was true as well. Mm-hmm. Well, we talked a while, and I knew I had a friend, and all of a sudden my burden to go on radio came back. I said, Eldred, God is eating me up to start a prophecy talk show, but I don't have a clue. How do you speak in a microphone and they hear you all over the world? Right. How in the world does that happen? He said, I know how to do it. I've been broadcasting all my life. He said, and when you're ready to go, you're on, he said, I own the finest radio station in Dallas, Texas. And when you're ready to go on, you're on my station. And he said, right there's what it's going to cost you, $0.
Man.
Well, it was like, before I left there, he picked up the phone and called his son, who was running the KVTT here in Dallas, and said, clear 3 to 4 in the afternoon, drive time Dallas, for Irvin Baxter. And his son argued with him. We don't even know who that guy is. And Eldred Thomas said, I said, God told me to do this, now do it. And so by the time I walked out the door, I was scheduled to be on the radio, drive time Dallas, all of Dallas, all of Fort Worth Metroplex. And when I walked out of that television station that way, I felt like I had a big footprint in my back saying, boy, you're getting ready to fly whether you want to or not.
Yeah.
And so 3 months later, we were on the air, and great things started happening.
Man, that's an amazing story. And that's one of the main miracles we talk about when we talk about starting End Time Ministries, was that miracle of him putting you on the flaming blowtorch of a station in Dallas, our flagship station.
100,000 watt FM, every direction.
Yeah, absolutely, man. What a miracle. So a new routine. I mean, you had to adjust. You had a family, you were pastoring a church, doing a magazine, then you jump onto radio. How in the world did you juggle that?
I don't know.
You just jumped in, huh?
Yeah, you do what you got to do.
Right.
And I was pastoring a church. We had 4 services per week that I had to speak at least 2 or 3 of them.
Right.
And then I had to prepare for the broadcast every day. And then in addition to that, I had to produce the magazine.
Right.
In addition to that, I was traveling, holding conferences. And then I wrote a book or 2 on the side. And then I had 3 wonderful girls and a wonderful wife.
Yeah.
So
one of those girls takes me full time to manage, so I can only imagine
Yeah, well,
the rest of it.
Really looking back, it's
Yeah.
I almost don't know how we did it, but God calls you to do it.
Yeah, it was a God
And when
thing.
He calls you to do it, you just do it.
Right.
Because God doesn't take to excuses very kindly.
Right, I understand.
So
originally, the name of the program was Politics and Religion. Many people listening and watching will recognize that, and they'll recognize the opening. And I want to play that opening right now. Many people are going to recognize it.
Look, there are 2 things I don't discuss: politics and religion.
In my house, we don't talk about politics and we don't talk about religion.
I'll talk to you about anything except politics and religion.
I never talk about politics and religion.
politics determines how we'll live here on earth. Religion determines how we'll live forever. I'm Irvin Baxter. I think it's time we talk about it.
So that was the famous opening for years and years. Everybody recognized the program coming on from Jim Stiglman's mom, Barb. Look, there's 2 things I don't talk about: politics and religion. So as a result, I've got a 2-part question for you. Why did you call it politics and religion in the beginning? And then why have we now changed it to end of the age?
Well, I called politics and religion because I understood by then the prophecies that the end-time kingdom of the Antichrist would be a union of politics and religion. Mm-hmm. That there would be a political leader, the Antichrist, and a spiritual leader, the false prophet. It would be the Holy Roman Empire reborn. So on that basis, I felt like if I could explain to everybody the coming one world government, the coming one world religion, and the leaders of those two entities, so from that, we decided to call it Politics, Religion. Plus, it was fun, because two things I don't talk about, politics and religion. So anyway, that's the reason that we decided to name it Politics, Religion, and it worked marvelously for us.
Right. So I've got a couple minutes left, and I know that Dallas, Texas was our flagship station. So tell us the story about the conference that you had when you came down.
I'll tell you what, let me tell you about, because you did ask about why we switched to End of the Age.
That's right.
Let me tell you about that, because I knew we were getting ready to go on television then. Mm-hmm. Well, politics and religion, I wasn't sure would be, people would receive it.
Right.
Because when you start talking politics, some people get upset, and when you start talking about religion, they really get upset. Yeah. So consequently, we decided that this new name would better convey what our television program was going to be about. Mm-hmm. And that is that we're in the end time. We're now at the end of the age of human government, and we're now on the brink of the beginning of the kingdom of God. So after tossing around, I wanted to have our radio and our television have the same name, because ultimately I thought perhaps we would have our daily radio program also on television. So I thought we better have it be the same name. So that's when we decided that we would call the television program and the radio program End of the Age. So that's the reason why.
So and it's served us well. And of course, that's the new brand now is End of the Age. Both programs, radio and television.
And we're closer to the end of the age right now than we have ever been.
Yeah,
it's coming at us like gangbusters right now.
There's no doubt in my mind about that. And it's been a miraculous thing that I've watched over the years. Of course, you more than me. You've been involved in this 20 years of work, getting us to the point where we're at now. And so this concludes this segment of the End of the Age. And in our next program, we will continue to celebrate the 20 years of the End of the Age radio program with myself and Irvin Baxter. Thank you very much for joining me.
Move Mountains with Irvin Baxter, the new book by Irvin's grandson, provides 30 days of devotion that will enhance your connection to God and others. Authentic illustrations from early morning devotions at End Time will help you find your purpose and eliminate fears. Commit to taking this 30-day journey and experience real life change. Order this brand new book for only $14.99. Call 1-800-363-8463 or go to endtime.com/move.
If ever people needed to hear the unvarnished truth, it is now. There are some subjects that are not politically correct to talk about, but they're urgent. That's why I'm grateful for End Time magazine. If you're not a subscriber, you're missing information that will impact your life. End Time has a bi-monthly magazine that explains how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. You can get a 2-year subscription for only $29. You can also get a bulk subscription and pass them out to your church. We have gotten reports that End Time magazine has caused spiritual awakenings in churches when they see the prophecies being fulfilled right now. You can start your own ministry and leave them in doctor's offices, libraries, laundromats. You never know if you might be responsible for saving someone who is searching for the unvarnished truth. That's what the magazine has done in many lives. Call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463 and get your subscription today.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archive button.
So on today's program, we're continuing our celebration of 20 years of broadcasting on the radio. And I'm Dave Robbins. I'm interviewing the host of End of the Age, the founder and president of End Time Ministries, Irvin Baxter. Thank you for joining me today, Irvin.
It's a pleasure to look back on 20 years. Sometimes it seems like yesterday, and sometimes it seems like an eternity.
Yeah, absolutely, especially when we dive off into a mag cycle or something like that. I'm like, oh man, another one. But I know the good that it's doing, and but we've got blood, sweat, and tears in every one of those. So, in every radio program, but it's well worth it. I want to dive back off into my questioning here because this is so informative. People want to know about the inner workings of the 20 years of radio broadcasting. And over the years, this is one of the places I've been looking forward to the most because these have been so helpful. Over the years, you've had some very informative radio interviews, people that have just unlocked something in prophecy. And what are some that really impacted you and you said, oh man, I didn't know about this, but wow, it's really opened my eyes. I know some of them, but tell some of our viewers about them.
I was driving through Chicago, and I had the radio on to a talk show. It was the station was WBBM Radio. I think it's still on there in the Chicago area. And a man was interviewing a priest by the name of Malachi Martin. He was a Jesuit, and he also taught in Vatican College for 6 years. He was an intimate friend with Pope John the 23rd, and he had just written a book called The Final Conclave. Well, I knew enough about Catholicism. I knew a conclave was when they got together to elect a new pope. And when he said the final conclave, it caught my attention because I knew in the Bible it teaches that there's going to be a last pope. So in this book, he was saying that there was a huge struggle going on inside the Roman Catholic Church. They were getting ready to elect a new pope because Pope Paul VI was terminally ill with cancer. Everybody knew it. And so he said, we're getting ready to elect a new pope, but there's a strong faction in the Roman Catholic Church that favors communism. And yet there's another fact in the church that wants to get the church out of politics and get us back to our true spiritual mission. He said, if the communists win, I believe that'll be the last pope we ever elect. But he said, I feel like we need to get out of politics and get back to our true spiritual mission. Well, I went out and bought the book that day. I read through that, and he had written it in a fictional style, but yet he had interjected what he thought the future was going to hold. Well, sure enough, Pope Paul VI died 6 months later, and I was following everything I could read. Okay, let's see who's going to win the papacy here. Will Malachi Martin's man win and return the church to its true spiritual mission, or will the communists win? Well, they had an election, and they elected a man who took the name Pope John Paul I. Well, I was watching, is this guy the communist, or is he the guy that's going to get back to the spiritual? Well, on his 33rd day of his papacy, he issued an order to discipline Cardinal Cody, the powerful Archbishop of Chicago, because Cardinal Cody had funneled over $1 million of church money to a woman down in Florida, claimed she was his cousin, turned out she was his mistress. Well, this guy had the nerve to put the crunch on Cardinal Cody. Not only that, there was a man who was over the Vatican Bank, Paul Marcinkus, and he issued the order that day because Paul Marcinkus was under a warrant for his arrest from the Italian government, but he avoided arrest by staying within the walls of the Vatican. And so this new pope ordered his removal as head of the Vatican Bank. And I heard that, and I thought, oh my God, my goodness, I think the Malachi Martin's guy won. I think he's cleaning the house. Well, guess what? The orders happened that day, but they were never carried out. He died that night. And my spiritual radio went beep, 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 something, because the man was 65 years of age in perfect health. Well, within 3 months, books began to appear stating, one was called In God's Name by David Yallop, stating that he had been assassinated. Another one was called Pontiff. It too stated he was assassinated. And then I had Malachi Martin back on my program, and I asked him privately, was he assassinated? He said, there's no doubt. So anyway, we had Malachi Martin on. So interesting several times. We can't go into everything he said or else we'll consume all of our time.
The thing is, that's something you would never learn in high school, never going to learn in college. I mean, if you had not had Malachi Martin on.
And it reflected the prophecy of the Bible, because the Roman Catholic Church is in the prophecies of the Bible, and there's a prophecy there that there's a pope coming that will be an evil pope who will form an alliance with communism. It's all in the Bible. And here he was talking about it without referencing the Bible. He didn't even know it was in the Bible. And I'm watching all this. It was taking my breath away, frankly. So it was amazing. Well, then I had another guest. I'll never forget. His name was Robert Muller. And he was the Assistant Secretary General to 3 Secretary Generals of the United Nations. And they also called him the prophet of the UN, because he was the guy that foresaw where the UN should go. He wanted it to be a bona fide world government. Right. He wrote, I think, 6 or 8 books. I had every one of them. And in there, he unabashedly called for one world government. Well, I knew the United Nations was designed to be a one world government, and the Bible prophesied a one world government for the days just ahead. So I've had these guys on my radio program, and everything they're saying, I've already taught the prophecies on the radio program, and all of our audience is out there listening saying, oh my goodness, all this stuff that Irvin taught us in the prophecies is in fact happening right in front of our eyes right now. After that, we had Edward Griffin on. He wrote the book, The Fearful Master, an expose of the United Nations, and he was fabulous. And, you know, when I was in high school, I was a junior in high school, I took U.S. history. And I didn't know anything about politics. I didn't know anything about government. I was just wanting to get a grade and get out there. I wasn't interested. But we came to the last chapter of the U.S. history book, and I'll never forget opening it up, and it said, the United Nations, mankind's last hope for peace. Well, I didn't think too much about it then. But once I got interested in prophecy, and I saw the Bible prophesied a world government, and the United Nations is the only entity on the face of the planet designed to be a world government. And here, my U.S. history book is trying to indoctrinate my young, impressionable mind at the age of 16 that the United Nations is mankind's last hope for peace. I actually hunted until I found that history book, and I bought one of them because I wanted to have that to show people what they actually were trying to drill into us. And believe it or not, you know, Dave, even today, the educational institutions of America are trying to instill all of this in all of our students. That's the reason most of them graduate from college believing in socialism. It's not because they believe in socialism, because they've never run a business, they've never held a public job, possibly, and yet they come out saying, oh, I believe we need to have socialism. It's because their professors are telling them, and their textbooks are telling them that this has been planned for 100 years, and they're drilling this into us. That's the reason we're fighting some of the battles we're fighting right now.
Yeah. So you had tons of great ones. I mean, we could go through a lot of guests that you've had the rest of the day, but I know one of the things that has, and we may get back to some of them if we have time, but one of the things that you've done that has allowed you, and our viewers, our partners have loved this, is you've started taking callers on the radio program so people could interact with you, 1-877-END-TIME. Did you do that from the very beginning, take callers online, or was it just you talking for them?
No, I believe we did it almost from the very beginning because I wanted it to be a talk show.
Okay, so I didn't know that.
Yeah,
so,
from the very beginning, we started it as a talk show. So, yes, we did take callers from the very beginning.
Yeah, okay, so one of the things everybody wants to know is, because there's so many opinions and things of people calling in, and sometimes people will, and I've listened to this myself for years, some people will call in and they're diametrically opposed to what you teach. So they're calling in there to give you what they think, or they'll call in and, you're wrong, Irvin, and this, that, and the other. And you take it so patiently. I've had so many people say, he's just calm, cool, and collected, but then the next caller may come on and say, Irvin, because of what you've taught me, I'm going to be saved. I have an opportunity to know the Lord, and this, that, and the other. So diametrically opposed positions there, but yet you handle everything so calm, cool, and collected. So what helps you to do that? Because you see some of these interviews on television now, and they're just going at each other like cats and dogs, and yet people come against you, and you're just calm, cool, and collected. How does that happen?
Well, Dave, I think that's what Christianity is.
Sure.
I think that you treat all people good no matter what, and I think we all, as Christians, are supposed to maintain a Christian attitude. And consequently, the Bible says the servant of God must not strive. So I've tried to treat people good because a lot of times those people are sincere people, but they're just sincerely wrong. The Apostle Paul, he would have been one of those that would have called up and he would be banging on the table and screaming in my ear. But yet, he was a chosen vessel.
Right.
And you never know who's on the other end. So you got to be good to all people.
Right.
And I've had a lot of people that called here that were pretty irate. but because we did treat them nice,
Yeah.
later on they changed their mind, and they even would become a partner of our ministry or whatever. So I just think it's our Christian duty. It's the right thing to do. Plus, it's better for your blood pressure when you handle things that way.
I've talked to people. I'm a minister here at End Time, and I've talked to people that wanted you to come back at them. And they were frustrated because they wanted the fight. And you said, no, it was real calm. You acted like a Christian, and they were kind of taken aback by that. They didn't know how to handle that.
Well, remember, Jesus taught us that, the Sermon on the Mount.
Right.
Love those that hate you.
Right.
Bless
Absolutely.
those that curse you. Do good to those that despitefully use you. And I'm not sure we can truly claim to be Christian if we don't conduct ourselves that way. So I'm not saying I've always been perfect in that regard, but that's what we try to do.
Yeah, and I greatly appreciate that about you, because I've seen you in many instances do that, and I've admired you for that.
Well,
and I know many of our listeners have over the years as well, over the 20 years that we've heard you on the radio and beyond. So another thing I wanted to ask you about on today's program, celebrating 20 years, is obviously we're prophecy driven. We do talk about the other 70% of the Bible, but it's that 30% that we focus on. It's end of the age. It's concerning the second coming of Jesus Christ. These prophecies. So, what are some of the prophecies that have occurred over the last 20-year segment? Not necessarily beyond that, but that have occurred or ongoing prophecies that you can say some specific events that took place that you could come to the microphone and say, folks, listen to me. This happened. This is a direct fulfillment of Bible prophecy, or this is the ongoing fulfillment. Now, I know you could spend days and days and days, but I mean, over the next several minutes or so, give me some of the prophecies that while you were on the radio, you come to the mic that day and said, folks, listen, I got to tell you this, and laid it out.
Well, a couple of things that happened even before we were on the air that we ended up talking about when we were on the air was, of course, the birth of the nation of Israel, 1948. Right. Then the 1967 Six-Day War, when Israel took control of all of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. And then, of course, 1989, when the Berlin Wall came down, and they started talking about the New World Order. Well, from that point on, they began to talk about globalization. And they started talking about the New World Order, the international community, the world community. Then they started talking about the World Court, the International Criminal Court. Well, every time one of these things would happen, for example, we went on the air in 98. Well, in 98 was when they signed the charter for the International Criminal Court. Right. It was signed in July of 98, so we went on the air, I think it was April of 98. So I wasn't on the air long, and I remember putting the International Criminal Court, a picture of it, on the front page of our magazine to let people know, hey, the Bible teaches we're going to have a one-world government, a one-world religion. In order to have a world government, you've got to have a world court system to enforce the laws of that world government. And ladies and gentlemen, here it is, July the 20th, I think it was July the 20th of 1998. The World Court was formed. And that's been in our news just recently. John Bolton, within the last 2 weeks, has said, the World International Criminal Court is dead to us. It has no power over us. But I knew back then how dangerous it was, because it was proposed by President Clinton at his UN speech in September of 97, and they immediately kicked it off. And at his right elbow was Strobe Talbot, who wrote an article which was in Time magazine, July the 20th of 1992, entitled The Birth of the Global Nation. Well, Talbot was pushing Clinton to move toward this world court, and the World Federalist Association had been campaigning for it for a long time. So that's the way this whole 20-year trip has been. Because every day I had a friend of mine say to me, when he heard I was going to produce a prophecy magazine, he said, "You're doing a prophecy magazine? After 3 editions, what are you going to put in it?" I didn't even try to explain to him. I knew he didn't understand. He'd had a heart attack if he had known you and I were going to be in the air every day, 5 days a week.
Oh, my goodness.
And yet we never get to all of our material because God He's got his nose in all of our business.
Right.
God's in everything that's going on on the earth, and so that's the reason that this program is more important today than it's ever been before.
Yeah. I want to back up just a moment and go back to the beginning. And just I want everybody to get a clear picture of the inner workings of how all this progressed. In '98, you started in the broadcast in a small bedroom in a house or something like that. I mean, tell me the story of how that developed.
Well, we started End Time Ministries when I printed my first book. Then we started the magazine in 1991. Well, I had an office in our church. Next door to my office was my secretary's office. It was 13 by 26.
Yeah.
So that was her office. Well, then she needed help, and we had another person come on. We ended up with 6 people in that 13 by 26 office. Mm-hmm. It was really, really tight. They were working well. We kept growing, and the church owned a double house next door. We decided to take half of the double house, turn that into End Time Ministries. Mm-hmm. Well, we did. We outgrew that. So we took the other half. Well, that's when Eldred Thomas made his offer to put us on the radio. So now we've got to build a studio. How do I build a studio? I don't have a clue. But guess what? I came home from that Texas trip. I was teaching through the book of Revelation in my church at the time. And I look up, and back there sits Ray Slick and his wife Bonnie. Mm-hmm. They had never been in our church, but I knew them because he was the chief engineer for Allied Broadcasting, owned by Roy Ridge.
So he just shows up at the conference.
He shows up to listen to the book of Revelation, and it's like I was seeing an angel. I went back to him and I said, Ray, I've got to build a studio. Do you know anything about that? He said, yeah, a piece of cake. He said, we do it all the time. So we plug and play. We send them overseas to missionaries and everywhere. Well, I didn't have any money,
right,
but God just helped us every way. And Ray, he built that studio. We took one bedroom, and by the time it was done, we were really cramped. But anyway, that's where we started out. And he was such a good engineer that he had us sounding like Rush Limbaugh from upstairs of that double house with the semis rolling by outside, but nobody heard them. It sounded like we were just big time, and I guess we soon became that.
Absolutely. So that was in Richmond, Indiana, where you pastored a church for 33 years, raised your family. But we're sitting in Dallas. So how did that, why are we sitting here? Let me ask you that. I mean, a lot of people would like to know. Why you started out in Richmond, why are you here?
Well, we moved from the double until Roy Ridge wanted to sell his building, so we bought that. So we moved over there, and that's where the ministry was really growing. But then I always knew that there would come a time that End Time Ministries would become so demanding and so critical, because the prophecies I knew were going to escalate, that I would have to give my full time to it. As much as I hated the thought of leaving my church that I'd pastored for 33 years.
Right.
But yet I knew someday it was coming. My wife kept talking in my ear, hey, you're doing all this stuff. You don't give this church enough time, and blah, 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 blah. And so I said, but babe, until God shows me what to do, I can't do. Well, one day I got a phone call from Pastor D.G. Hargrove. And he said to me, I was down praying today, and he said, I really hesitated to call you, but I felt like God spoke to me that if you would move to Dallas and partner with our church here, that God would use us together to reach the world. And I said, well, Brother Hargrove, I'm a radical on hearing from God, a major life decision. God's got to show me, and I respect your word immensely, but let me pray about it. So we begin to pray, we begin to fast, asking God to direct us. And I won't go into the details of the story, even though they're amazing.
Oh, yeah.
But finally one day God spoke to me. I knew he spoke to me that day. And even after he spoke to me, I thought, I'm going to go on one more 3-day fast, because this is a big decision. I cannot miss God. Well, I went on this fast, and I knew. So we got a pastor to take the church there, and I had to leave the people. My dad had been there 16 years. Now I'm there 33 years. I'd been in that church for 49 years. And
it's tough,
to pull off and leave those people, I felt like I was deserting my kids, really. And it was horrible. The last service I was with them, I got up that day, and it was on my mind. It's my last time to be with my people. And I got in my car and headed towards, and the tears started rolling down my face, Dave, and I couldn't stop them. And I'm not normally a crybaby. But I couldn't stop. My mind, I knew I was in God's will. We already had a new pastor elected. Everything was laid. But as the tears were rolling down my face all the way to the church, I pulled into my parking spot, said, Pastor, for the last time. Man, that hit me like a ton. I walk inside, And I go into my office. I'm trying to get myself together because I don't want to see everybody. I don't want everybody to see me crying. I've been their leader for 33 years.
Right.
I walked down the aisle, but I couldn't stop it. My brain, I tried to shut it off my brain, but my emotions overpowered my brain. I'm sitting on the platform, and the tears keep rolling down my face. I had a box of Kleenex. It was horrible.
Yeah.
But anyway, it came time for me to preach that night, and I couldn't do it. But I've often thought since then, why was I so emotionally moved like that? Well, I love the people, number one. But number two, I think God wanted them to know I was not leaving for bigger and greener pastures.
Right.
I wasn't leaving them because I wanted to. It was killing me. And I think God wanted them to know that I loved them, but I had to obey God. Yeah. So anyway, we loaded up 2 or 3 semis.
What year was that?
That would have been 2005.
Yeah, okay.
2005. And we moved down here to Garland, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas. Mm-hmm. And the church there, Brother Hargrove's church, had purchased a building of 5,000 square feet. And I told him at the time, I said, well, this will probably last us a couple of years because we moved in cramped.
Yeah.
And, of course, you came down early and you remodeled everything to get everything ready for us. And so we moved in. And then 2 years later, we were bulging the walls. Mm-hmm. And so we found this place that we're in now, and we were able to negotiate a lease for purchase deal.
Right.
And this is when God was really dealing with me about going on television. Mm-hmm. So I told you what I wanted to do, and we hired a TV consultant to tell us what to do since we didn't know what we were doing. And we built you built the television studio that we're in right now. Mm-hmm. You're a model of this whole thing. So that's what brought us from Richmond, Indiana to where we are here. And now then, the last couple of years, God enabled us to buy our building. Yeah. So we now own this property here, even though we still owe on it, but yet it's ours. So anyway, that's sort of the story, the trip that we made. Yeah,
and to see how God is kind of give us stepping stones all the way. Radio, if I got the story right, radio was instrumental on helping us get on television to launch that, because I know that didn't Joni Lamb of Daystar, wasn't she listening to you as she picked up her kids from school, and then that led to an interview? And
Marks and Joni owned Daystar Television, right. And so Joni was listening to us on the radio on KVTT when she'd go to pick up her kids to school every day. Mm-hmm. Well, she got to liking what she was hearing. Right. And so the next time we were coming to Dallas for a conference, we got a call saying, hey, while you're down here, would you come and be on our program? Yeah. Well, I was glad to do it. So I got to know Marcus and Joni Lamb. And so when it came time to go on television, you built this studio. Right. And I came out here and stood in this studio, and I looked around, and I knew I'd spent every dime we could borrow, get. I think I was in debt $650,000. Right. And I told God one day, I was standing right here, I said, God, I was sure you told me to do this, but I couldn't buy an hour's television time to save my neck right now. Mm-hmm. What am I supposed to do? Well, probably 3 weeks later, a couple of businessmen that loved our ministry and that loved me called me in our office in there and said, do we want to talk to you? They knew I didn't have the money to go on television. One of them looked at me. He said, I'm paying for you to go on Daystar Television. Now, this was a lot of money. It was many thousands per month. Mm-hmm. He said, I'm paying for you to go on television. I'm paying the whole bill on Daystar. The other one looked at me and said, I'm paying for you to go on TBN. I'm paying the entire bill. Mm-hmm. I walked out there thinking, I am going on television. Absolutely. Well, it wasn't quite that easy, though, because these were the 2 largest Christian television networks in America. Yep. And you don't just walk in and say, hey, I'm going to be in your station. Well, I knew Marks and Joni Lamb, and so they were very kind to me, and it was fairly easy for us to get ready there. We had to learn how to edit the programs and make them TV compatible and all that. Mm-hmm. But when I got ready to be on TBN, which at the time was the largest Christian network, they wouldn't give me the time of day. We called them, we sent DVDs, we did everything in our power. Block wall. Right. No answer. I remember. But now we had the money. I mean, $30,000 a month. Yeah. Somebody donated. So I called our people together on our staff here, and I said, we got to pray. It's God's will for us to be on, but the doors are slammed shut in our face. So I remember right over here in my office, we went to prayer, and we said, okay, God, you got to open the door. 3 days later, Dave, 3 days later, my phone rang here. My daughter, Kara, took the call, and it was Paul Crouch's personal assistant, Paul Crouch being the head of TBN Ministries. And she said, this is Paul Crouch's personal assistant. And he heard Irvin Baxter on an interview with Marcus Lamb last night, and he would like to have him come and be on his program. Now, we just prayed 3 days before.
Yeah, it was a miracle, no doubt.
So 3 weeks later, I'm on a plane headed for Santa Ana.
Man.
And when we got done with that interview with Paul Crouch, he looked at me and said, "You got a television program?" I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "I want you on my station."
Absolutely. Yeah, what a miracle that was. And you mentioned a couple partners that were instrumental in putting us on TV. And I wanted to mention them just before we get, I've got a couple minutes left. And we mentioned the faithfulness of our partners earlier. And I mean, looking back over the years, how important to you and I have our partners been, our faithful partners? None of this would have been possible.
You know, Dave, we've had people that have given us large amounts. We have had people that have given us $5, $10 a month. And you never know when the person that's given $10 a month may be given more than the ones giving you $500 a month.
Exactly.
Because they may not have much to do with. So no matter whether the gifts have been small or large, we've appreciated every single one of them. And we've had partners that have been with us from the very beginning. It's been amazing.
Yeah.
And it seems like we never have too much, but somehow we always make it. I mean, there have been times it was really tight. I said, "Okay, God, we need your help right now," because we need his help every day. But anyway, God has provided wonderfully for us through our partners. But, you know, right now I'm thinking about, we're almost on the brink of entering the final 7 years to Armageddon. And we've got to reach this whole world. This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, then shall the end come. We're going to have to really step on the gas now. So, by the way, if you're out there, you're not yet a partner, get on the phone, call us, 1-800-END-TIME, because we're getting ready for the greatest era of prophetic fulfillment in the history of the universe. We're getting ready to enter it right now. The end time is now. So if you're not a partner yet, call us, 1-800-END-TIME. Our operators will tell you what to do.
When we say listener supported, we really mean listener supported. And I mean, that's the absolute truth. And then, you know, I've told people over the years being on the radio, we're not getting rich. That's not what this is all about. This is truly, and that's why every once in a while I want to share the miracles and things God has done through this ministry, because this is a God thing. This is not a money-making scheme that you come up with. This is God is every step of the way. He's been leading and guiding you, Irvin Baxter.
Well, Dave, I want to take this time to say one more thing, very important. If you're out there right now, God has helped us to put together the Jerusalem Prophecy College. And if you're not yet enrolled in that, you need to get there, because just Dave and I don't need to know this material. We all need to know it. Your family's going to need it. Everybody's going to need it. So if you're not yet enrolled in Jerusalem Prophecy College, JerusalemProphecyCollege.com, register, enroll, get started.
So this concludes the end of today's program, our celebration of 20 years. So along with Irvin Baxter, I want to say a special thank you to our partners. Thank you for joining us, and God bless each and every one of you.
This has been End of the Age, brought to you by the faithful partners of End Time Ministries. If you're not currently a partner with End Time Ministries, or if you would like more information, we invite you to call us at 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463, or visit us online at endtime.com.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page.